Okay. Yeah.
Got it.
Are you all fine with recording?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now my phone is updating. Oh gosh. Yeah. I don't know. Me and technology. I mean, it is a love-hate relationship. Okay, maybe I would just, I would be happy if all of you would comment to those comments first written by Alex and then my replies. But because, of course, I cannot expect all of you to have read my long and boring paper and Alex's comments and then my replies. I mean, I could read the whole thing, the whole replies, but I think this is almost 8 pages and it would be too long. So I have, I will try to summarize them. And Alex, if you think that I have laid too much stress on wrong things, then you can, of course, add something. But before I begin, I would like to say a few things, namely because I don't think that all of you are aware of this fact. Namely, in autumn, I think I wrote to, no, I have to start 2 years ago when I was invited by Nick and Stephen to this magnificent project, and I was really thrilled about it. Why was I thrilled about it? Because, and I felt very honored and glad that they invited me. So I was, because I was so thrilled about it because for me, it was the first opportunity, to enter into a dialogue with philosophers which are not only experts in Chinese philosophy, but also Western trained philosophers who are experts in other non-European philosophies, and so on, because I don't have a lot of such opportunities. Especially, I'm sitting in a very small provincial country. I just don't have partners for such dialogues in my own country. I'm, of course, in continuous dialogue with people who are also doing Chinese philosophy, but not, for instance, with Western trained philosophers who are also very much interested in comparative cultural philosophical issues. So I was really thrilled because this is something that I do. This is something I think it is important. And for me, it was such a wonderful experience meeting you continuously for a year, every month or so, and having these debates, discussions with you. It was really wonderful. It was a wonderful experience for me, and I really learned a lot. But I entered into this project, among other things, because I wanted to meet you all in person. I wanted to attend this conference because there is also not only because Zoom meetings cannot replace personal meetings, we all know that, right? But also because if I would be in the UK, I would stay there for a few days before the conference. And I think that all people who are not native English speakers have this experience. My English is really rotten. I mean, I can read it and understand it, but it's rotten and terrible. And if I am in an English-speaking country for a few days, because I've never lived in an English-speaking country for a longer time, but for a few days, most of the blocks fall away and I become more fluent, not only in expressing myself, but also in understanding. In these Zoom meetings, I understand maybe 75 or 80% of what you are saying. On a personal conference, on-site conference, this would be different. I could also clarify my thoughts in English. And, well, in short, it would be a completely different matter altogether. So the first year, for the first conference, there was COVID, and it had to be canceled, of course. Then the second year, last summer, I was already in my car in Strasbourg. And then the British Queen passed away, and I'm sure she didn't do that on purpose, just to that I can attend this conference. But it was really a sad occasion. But of course, I understood that the conference had to be postponed again. But then you will now meet in March when I really cannot go because I'm just too busy with teaching, and I'm not going to the UK for a weekend only. So in this way, I was, like, oh, all of them will now meet in person and they know each other already, and I will be excluded again. And I have some psychological issues anyway with being excluded. So I was, I just didn't feel any excitement about this project anymore, because I knew I can still meet you on Zoom, but it is not the real thing. So I told Stephen that I would like to drop out from the project. And I explained to him everything, and he, of course, he understood the whole thing. But Stephen is such a charming gentleman that he finally persuaded me. He said, "Okay, then you won't be joining these meetings anymore, but at least you could submit a paper." And then I said, "Okay, of course I can submit a paper, but still I'm sad that the things are as they are." Okay, so why was I telling you all this? Because I would like you to know that also in preparing this paper, I just didn't invest as much energy as I would in case things would be different. It is nobody's fault, but I just wanted to apologize for the fact that this paper is really a very rough version. Okay, but now I'll stop and with lamenting and yammering, and I would like to share. Do you see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yeah. So I will just try to summarize what this dialogue or this debate between Alex and myself. But yeah, my watch is not. My phone is not working, so I don't have a watch. But I will try to do it in between 20 and 30 minutes. So we'll still have some time for debate. But I think for the people who maybe weren't here from the very beginning, it is quite important to know this background. And now I can, yeah. So the first thing, Alex's comments were 6 actually, and I will just go through these 6 comments and through my replies to these comments. Well, the first comment was in nutshell that Alex had the feeling. Alex, you had the feeling. I only see Stephen here. That's why I'm talking in the third person. That you had the feeling that I was interpreting Gongsun through a Western philosophical framework, and that this is a kind of Eurocentrism. And then my reply was that this is a Chinese philosophical framework. In fact, I don't know how I could use a Western philosophical framework, because I don't know the Western philosophical framework, because I am not a Western trained philosopher. When I approached Chinese philosophy, I was like tabula rasa, and I approached it directly through and practically solely through Chinese sources. But I know what you mean. You mean that I'm applying certain concepts which have different meanings in the European philosophical tradition, and this is of course quite This is, I'm sorry, I'm trying to, I'm trying to make my phone working. I'm so sorry. What is the pin?
Yeah, don't worry about the time. I'll tell you when 20 minutes is up.
25, yeah. Okay, but yeah. Yeah, his first question in this, because these comments were annotated, that you elaborated on them also, that this starts already with the research question, which was the relation between concepts and objects, and that this is a European concept, an European Western notion, that there are possibly not such conceptualizations in Chinese philosophy. So I think that's not true, because the relation between concepts and objects, Ming and Shi, or concepts, names and actuality, was a central issue in ancient Chinese philosophy of the pre-Qin period. Not only in the school, in both logical school, but also in Confucianism, and then in Neo-Daoism during the Wei Jin period, and so on. So, and then Alex says that the notion of the philosophical problem in itself is already a Western notion. So, and I respectfully disagree with this also, because especially the Chinese logicians were working a lot with philosophical problems, and they named them Lun. For instance, in Gongsun Lung, all the chapters are on certain philosophical problem. For instance, Baimalun, the problem of the white horse problem, the Jianbailun, the problem of heart and hardness and whiteness. Then the third sub-question that was somehow highlighted is the question, who is actually we, when I'm talking about us? And of course, I'm pretty much aware that it is crucial to acknowledge the social and ideational background of the person who is doing certain transcultural research. But I applied the notion we simply as the person who is doing this, the individual researcher or the individual explorer, the person who is comparing, of course, along with their individual philosophical inquiries and interest. And of course, it is, if I said I'm talking about post-comparative philosophies. And I think I have highlighted the fact that post-comparative philosophies are those that transcultural, that are based on the awareness of the role, of the crucial role and function that is played by the social and ideational and in the intellectual and historical background of the people, of the person who compares. And now I see that Alex has risen his hand, has raised his hand, rose his. Okay,
Raised,
Alex, please. raised. Yeah, thank you.
I don't, Jana, the only reason I understand that you would like to go through your slides and then have time for discussion. But I wonder whether it would be useful to drop in, even at this point, a little clarification of my position.
Yes, of course, of course.
We
will just come as far as we come.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. And this is, in that sense, that it's okay, because this is a very, very important and fundamental point. So the clarification that I'm intending to bring into this will frame my position, not anybody else's, but my position to all of the other issues that I raised originally, and that your paper raised, that I responded to, and that you are responding to now. And it's this: I don't actually say anything about Chinese philosophy in my response to your paper, because I don't have the competence to say anything about it. So everything that you understand in my statement to be a factual claim about what Chinese philosophy does or doesn't contain is nothing of the sort. Nothing of the sort. What I'm doing is pretty much something entirely separate from the issue of facts and figures and histories and concepts in Chinese philosophy. It's something to do with perspective. One of the disagreements that we have, and that I think is a real disagreement, is you think clearly in your practice that the link between a certain language and a certain vocabulary in which to talk about something, and that something, in this case, philosophy, philosophical problems, questions like objects, concepts, you think that that link is to some extent something that doesn't interfere with the substance of the meaning. And I don't think that. I
never said that.
I know you didn't say that, but that's how you practice it. You practice it as if it made no difference whether you call something object or whether you use a Chinese term. And it's perfectly clear that you didn't write this paper, and nobody working in English could practically write this paper. But you didn't even raise the question or see the possibility that one might explain Adorno with the help of the Chinese concepts in Chinese. Instead, you're using the English concepts, which are all either Greek or Latin or otherwise Western, incorporate.
Yeah, they have this baggage.
2,000 years of Western connotations. You use them as if they could work as equivalents. And you furthermore use the term philosophy as if it was a badge of honor. I don't do that. I have absolutely
about what? I didn't.
A badge of honor. Something that the Chinese need to be defended against the claim that they don't have philosophy, as if saying they don't have philosophy is the same as saying they're not rational, which is another way you're referring to this, or that they don't have logic, that they have something missing. That's another thing that I don't share with you at all, not in the slightest. So what happens here is that I'm making a claim about the positioning of your perspective, and I'm asking my comments on one in particular really just ask for your addressing that. Partly you do exactly that in your response to my question, but only partly because to some extent you misunderstand my question. But I mean, it doesn't even matter very much. But really what I'm saying is that transforming whatever it is that the Chinese positions are into a vocabulary and into a language. English is, I mean, there's no choice. English works that way. There's no way we could not use philosophical vocabulary if we stay in English. But in doing that, and without questioning it, and then saying something like, well, if I were to question this, I would become Eurocentric. You are assuming a totally different position about the relationship between vocabulary, between words and topics. You assume a totally different relationship between words and topics from the one I assume. I think something like philosophy, something like a tree is slightly different, but something like any philosophical topic will be so influenced by the various other connotations and contexts. You explain this very, very clearly. You say these words in Chinese as well have different usages in different concepts, in different contexts.
Right.
What I don't buy is that you can isolate one context from all the other contexts, because I think that never happens. It doesn't happen in anything, in any discourse, regardless how technical it is, and it doesn't happen in English. And therefore, it's a transformation, maybe a totally necessary transformation, has taken place by the time you talk about objects and concepts. And I wanted to challenge you to address in your essay, without having to admit that this is Eurocentric, not at all, but address that transformation. And it's not something, so, but you understand me to say something like, only the West has philosophy and China needs to be defended against the claim that they don't have philosophy. That is totally, that's pretty much the opposite of what I wanted.
No. Thank you, Alex. Really, thank you very much. But this is actually not what I understood. I never thought you. How can I? Just a moment. I never thought that you would actually that you would think that there is no philosophy in China, and so I have to come and defend the poor Chinese and explain to you that they also have philosophy. No, it is not at all about that. I think I would like to get the whole picture. Yeah. But what I really thought is that maybe you and many other people also have a certain image about Chinese philosophy.
No.
Also not.
No,
Okay.
absolutely
Then
not.
I misunderstood your idea where you said that the notion of a philosophical problem in itself is a Western notion.
Clearly,
this is
yes.
What you wrote. How did you? I understood it in the way that it is a Western notion, and therefore it is somehow displaced that I put it in the minds and heads of mouths and heads of Chinese. You know what I mean?
Yes. I know. I understand that. But I think I'm doing just the same thing that I'm doing for the word concept and for the word object. I'm doing for the word philosophy and for the word problem, both of which are Greek in origin. I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm saying these are parochial European ways of looking at something that the Chinese may or may not, or the Hindus or the Indians or the Hebrews or the Arabs may or may not see in the same way. But the moment you have this vocabulary, you have predetermined that they are seeing it in the same way. And I don't believe that. I just don't believe that we can know this in advance. But if you use the vocabulary, you've decided it in advance, not in your case, perhaps, because you actually know the material. But then it still requires defending. It requires unpacking. It requires justifying that you can indeed think that the connotations of the English word philosophy and the connotations of the English word problem and the combination do a good job of interpreting the Chinese sources. And maybe that work is done somewhere else and you're simply presupposing it. But then it would be still useful to summarize it here. Because otherwise, and I said, I'm not saying that you were doing Eurocentric stuff. I said from the start that you could be misunderstood as doing Eurocentric stuff, precisely because no such explanation is in your paper.
Yes, Alex, I understand. I understand this problem, but what alternatives do we have if we want to, introduce Chinese thought, the philosophical questions, because they are raising opening philosophical questions in China, in the Chinese tradition. They do use certain philosophical terms also. And now one of the things that you proposed, how to solve this problem, that of course I understand completely what you mean. I say object, I said quality, and you have all this Western philosophical baggage when you hear them. You cannot but understand them in the framework of what you have learned, how you have been socialized. And then, but what is actually the alternative? What is the alternative? I mean, I have tried, and not only that is what most of the experts in Chinese philosophies are doing if they are trying to introduce those things in Western languages. I have tried to find word in which the overlapping connotations are the most.
I don't think
in the given context.
No, but that's not the solution I suggest. The solution I suggest is to acknowledge the fact that there is such a problem, and that you are using Western terminology, and why you're comfortable using it. So explaining exactly what you partly do in your response to me, and partly in your response to me now.
Now I see. Now I see. Because
Jana, can I suggestion?
Yeah. I think that Paulus was first, unless you have a very technical question.
Can I just make a procedural suggestion?
Yeah.
At least it's a question and a suggestion. My question is, am I right in thinking that we are actually addressing the nub of the issue, and that we probably don't need to go through the specifics of each of the 6 or 7 comments?
No. But we are now also talking about them anyway. Because many of the comments that then I can just stop sharing this. So
well, that's what I was going to say. So my suggestion was you stop sharing, and then
because
then
many of the issues that Alex has now touched upon were already explained in later PPTs.
So let me act,
let's do it.
Let me act as a sort of traffic cop. And so it's Paulus first, and then I think it was Nick, and then thirdly Shufu.
Yeah.
Yes,
I just wanted to finish this. For instance, we are talking a lot with our colleagues about how to solve this. This is indeed a very fundamental and very, very problematic question. We are all aware of that. But if there was also a suggestion to use the original Chinese terms, right? Like Dao. Dao, for instance, is okay, but most of the other, it's just undoable if you don't put the character to it. Also, because, for instance, Qi can meet vital energy, which is a very important concept.
That's not a problem, because even though I don't understand anything, I do recognize whether the same image is there or not. So that helps me, even though I couldn't pronounce it properly, and it's not part of any kind of. It still makes it possible to go from a paper by Jana to a paper by Shufu or by Nick, and even if they translate the term differently, I have a chance, both through the transcription, but also through the original, through the actual ideogram, to know whether they're talking about the same term or not. I'm doing this all the time with technical papers on Chinese philosophy, even though it is, a very, very basic and kind of barbaric procedure. It can make all the difference. So I'm not against you using the Chinese sign.
Some people are suggesting this, but some people are strongly against it. So this is, a controversial issue still. But I mean, I can do it in this paper, no problem. I can talk about Wu instead of objects. I can talk about
instead. I don't mean
instead of actualities.
Yeah, I don't mean instead. I mean as the first layer of commentary, basically.
Put it. Okay. Now, Paulus, sorry.
Paulus,
we have let you waiting.
No reason to apologize. No, it's nice to follow a lively conversation. And I have to admit, as you know, I wasn't there for the first discussion, so maybe I'm not really referring to your controversy. Just wanted to add 2 thoughts. I mean, one thought is about the question of, does a culture have philosophy? And is denying
relevant
culture has philosophy, is that denigrating this culture? I think this very much depends on our concept of philosophy, of course, and there are several concepts, but I think a lot of these concepts are normative in a way. I think a lot of concepts that we have of philosophy, I don't know, look at Plato, of course, but also a lot of modern, they would say something, for example, like philosophy means to question things that are obvious to common sense. And I think if we say this, and if we have such a normative concept, I think then it's not that easy to deny that a culture has this. Then, yeah, first point. Second point is that, but I find this very interesting, this idea of philosophical terminology. And if there is something special about philosophical terms, I mean, I would subscribe 100% that Alex's last point to say that we have to acknowledge that it's necessary to justify our translations. I think this is very much true. And if we translate something as problem or philosophical or so on, for example, the Lun, does the Lun really mean philosophical problem? We have to argue for this. I'm 100% sure, or I don't know, sure, but it matches my own thinking about these questions. On the other hand, I don't think that it's easy with any term whatsoever. I mean, tree and water, yeah, maybe it's a bit easier, but I wanted to stress that it's at least gradual. I mean, from maybe tree and water, you come to eye and body. What about perception? Yep. And then it's very close to concept. I think there is at least no strict limit between philosophical terminology and then you kind of suggested this when you said that there is like 2,000 years of history behind that. And I think you were referring probably to philosophical history. But in the end, I think it's the same problem with all terms that we have. We have to justify our translations. And it's, I agree, of course, that it's more problematic with the term like subject or individual than it is with the term tree. But I only wanted to stress that I think it's a gradual difference and not an absolute one. Yeah.
Can I comment shortly to Paulus?
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. No, I do not completely agree. I mean, we must not speak about philosophy, philosophical terminology. In this sense, in this context, we can talk about concrete and abstract terms. And I do think that concrete terms are easier translatable than abstract terms, because if I speak about chair and I say it's yizi in Chinese, or zhuozi, a table, it's somehow it is a word that refers to a concrete object, to a concrete thing, whereas abstract terms like maybe love or I don't know, desire, or things that don't refer to material things are much more culturally conditioned, I think, and it is much more difficult. So okay, we don't agree here, but where we probably so I see, in contrast to you, I see here a qualitative distinction. These are two categories for me that are not directly comparable. But okay, yeah, it's okay to disagree. This is very fruitful for a debate. Then, Alex, you have also proposed that maybe we should, in the beginning, that I should explain for okay. that I should explain all the terms, all these abstract philosophical terms, the broader context, all the connotation, the referential frameworks into which they are embedded? No.
No, I don't. What I say is it does not translate into saying you need to do all of this at all. That's not at all what I mean. What I mean is you need. I think that it would, in particular in this volume, it would be enough, but also is necessary for you to constantly, briefly problematize
in footnotes, for instance.
Sorry?
In footnotes, for instance.
For instance. So because what I'm really after is the acknowledgement, is the gesture of the acknowledgement of the problematical nature. So the fact that you have for yourself thought through the problem and come up with a workable solution is fine, is perfect, is beautiful. However, by not acknowledging that you've taken those steps and that there was a problem to be solved, you are misleading the reader, the ignorant reader, not the informed reader, but the ignorant.
Yeah, maybe the problem is that until now, I was writing my papers and books for readers who are familiar with Chinese philosophy. Yeah. So some things might be so self-evident for myself that I just don't see the need of it, the necessity. And but on the other hand, because you said why I maybe misunderstood this is maybe because you said somewhere also that if I would explain those terms, then and put them maybe the original term in brackets after it, then you would know afterwards. You could follow other papers about Chinese philosophy better. I think this is not necessarily the case, because first of all, should we make normative paper that everybody has to read before he or she reads anything connected to Chinese philosophy, or which, and we also disagree in certain points how to translate different things. And then also in these 2000 years of Chinese intellectual history, these terms have also been subject to great changes. So
yeah, but that's
if I speak about Gongsun Long, and he applies the term Wu completely different, for instance, than I don't know.
Could I suggest? I want to suggest that we hear from Sufu and from Nick to kind of the discussion. Sufu, you're on mute.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sympathetic to both Alice and Jana. So I think there's some, of course, a deeper methodological issue of how to compare and maybe even translate this concept. But there's also a practical issues of how to concentrate on the paper or present the paper to the readers. I think in that case, maybe we need not solve. It's hard to solve the methodological or the substantial question in a single paper, of course. But maybe we can take the practical way of stating. I think Alice may be asking no more than some qualification in the meaning in the beginning, saying that when I'm saying philosophical problems, I'm referring to certain concepts of Gongsun Long. I'm not presupposing that it must be the same, but for writing or for the paper subjects, we might translate it tentatively as that. Particularly since in the later steps of your summation, there's a referential framework. I think if the readers are alert of the potential problems or the potential inequivalence of the concepts, then they might be they won't make that many presuppositions. So they might wait for the referential framework to see how these questions are treated in the different backgrounds and contexts. and in that ways, maybe they will gain a better understanding. Otherwise they might, if they already presuppose certain things, when they might not be that easy to understand the referential framework, because they already thought that, well, it is something in the Western context or the Western thing, and they might be totally lost when you talk about the referential framework. So I think that maybe one simple solution is simply to say a few things, a footnotes, or even write for the first instance to include the pinyin or the Chinese character to alert the readers that there's a potential issue here.
And
that's
also, sorry. Also to explain this crucial context, how they are different from the Western notions and so on. But my only concern is this paper has to be cut into 2 parts anyway, because it's way too long. And I'm wondering if I can do, when I will explain all these notions also additionally in this 1/2 of the paper, that there won't be enough space anymore to do the whole thing with Adorno. But the volume is still about comparative metaphysics, isn't it?
So I can I just on that point, maybe, Jana, we should have a sort of stock-taking conversation after this, because we do need to make sure it fits within a reasonable number of words. But and it would be good to preserve the comparative thrust of it. But my sense is that if I understand what all 3 of Alex and Cifu and Paulus have said, that there's a basis for kind of acknowledging the problem and actually maybe setting out your perspective in 1 or 2 particular cases without writing a whole treatise on the general problem. I think there's a way forward. But what I want to suggest is actually we hear from Nick, because he's had his hand patiently up.
Yes. Sorry, Nick. Yeah.
No, that's fine. My hand appears and disappears because I have a very weak connection. So it's not that I lowered my hand, it's just I had to wait until I could sign on again. I have 2 quite practical examples. I had a student who was interested in Kitra Nishida's philosophical writings, both relating to Buddhism and to Heideggerian phenomenology. And he was also at a time when Western notions of philosophy were coming in to modernizing universities in Japan. And as a result, his own development was in terms of a unity of, I suppose, theory and practice, of philosophical discussion and ritual practice. But in his writings, he paired it so that the practical side was not emphasized. It might be mentioned, but it wasn't incorporated in his presentation. And my student said that this was a kind of Westernizing constraint, taking a notion of philosophy into Japanese culture, where philosophical thinking broadly was practiced continually from ancient times, and that, but it was a different notion which left out the practical side. So that here, looking at what philosophy means does make sense, just to note if there's a chance of misunderstanding what the framing notion of philosophy might be, to just signal that it might be broader or more narrow, depending on how you look at it from one side or the other. The other is a way that developed in trying to understand Western philosophy, where people like Alistair MacIntyre and Bernard Williams said that it's not just a matter of semantics, so that the term concept and object was central to discussions dealing with meaning and reference or sense and reference in modern Western logic and philosophy, but that they thought that it's not just a semantic notion, but also understanding what's at stake in just looking at meaning is the related terms with which a particular term you're interested in are associated with, is outside the scope of a semantic investigation, but is still a linguistic investigation of philosophical importance. So these two things strike me as being just examples where, if needed, you should be cautious to make sure that you aren't strictly dealing with the Western presupposition of what philosophy and its limits and scope and function might be. You don't do that. Or where you think that the notion of meaning is just a semantic notion for philosophical purposes. That might eventually be a conclusion, but it should be explored rather than assumed that, say, concept and object exhausts what you're interested in the meaning of Chinese and Western philosophical terms. I hope that's helpful anyway. And as far as different methodologies, I think the more the merrier, and listening to one another, but following your own sense of how to go about dealing with philosophical matters is fine. And difference is better than uniformity.
Of course.
For our purposes.
Of course, I think we all agree on that. But this is somehow really a lot to take in. You see, this is one of the reasons why I would really like to join you at the conference, because then I can think about it, and then maybe in 2 hours I see you again. And
there's still time for you to change your mind.
It's just, I have to be in Hong Kong very soon after that, so I don't.
I have good flights from here to Hong Kong.
Yeah. No, I would really love to, but yeah, I was now, after all that that Nick also said, I think originally I thought shortening this paper, although it has to be shortened for about 50%, is not such an issue, because the paper consists of 2 different parts. One is about this theoretical explanation of the concept of sublation, and the second one is the demonstration on the example of Gongsun and Adorno. And then we were talking, Stephen and I were talking that I just that I would use one of the 2, and now I'm starting to think that maybe it would be better if I would take the first part and I would explain all these problems that you have exposed and that you have raised now in this discussion and in the previous one, and write only this theoretical part and just don't do Gongsun and Adorno in this paper. Or what do you think? No? You are for the second part.
I'm for no choice. I think both need to be there. The current version of the paper, the version of the paper that you sent around, is something like 13,000 long.
Yeah, and it has to be like 7,000 or no? 8,000. Okay.
Yeah, I'd rather be. Yeah, I mean, it's just, in a way, it doesn't matter what I think, but my inclination.
Oh, it does very much.
No,
Alex,
but not.
Yes.
But
also, what
I
Paulus and Professor Tang.
I would be very much in favor of you doing both.
Both,
but shorter. And if it then is still a little bit longer, then we'll just have to have fisticuffs with Stephen to see whether he allows it or not. But seriously, I would give it a go. I would give it a go to have a paper in which you combine the 2 aspects, the theoretical and the applied, if you like, or the specific historical plus the meta. theory. I think it would be good to have both myself.
Yeah, but this is a much more difficult way to shorten this paper. Stephen, what is the time frame?
You mean right now? You mean, or
No, the time frame for the papers.
oh, you have time. We have time. We have time.
We have time.
Yeah, I would say.
Okay, that's a good news. Is it?
Well,
could
I'd
I
say
do
by
it
the-
because in I will have time in summer.
Yeah, no, there's certainly
I
time.
will have a lot of time in summer, but before
That-
summer, I'm really packed.
No, the summer would be just fine.
Okay.
Summer would be.
And I
I mean,
would really like then to send draft versions of these reworked papers to you, to all of you, for eventual comments. If I cannot see you at the conference, at least, would you be prepared to read this revised? Okay, thank you, thank you.
And I'm sure.
Okay,
Nick,
then I'll go for it, Alex.
I can't see Nick on the screen, but I'm sure he's nodding too.
Yeah, Nick.
He's on
He's
mute.
also muted. He's also muted.
Yeah, but I'm sure. And Xu Fu, I assume you would be happy to do the same. Can I, at the risk of stating,
Xu Fu and I will see each other very soon in
Good.
Hong Kong.
Yeah, in the COHK
Yeah.
conference.
Yeah, so we can talk a little bit more about that in person, at
Okay.
least. And
So I
I'm
think
going to present sublation there also.
So I think there are two possible outputs of this. There are two ways of doing the output. One is a more condensed version that does tackle both of the principal themes, as Alex has argued for. A variant will be actually to split into two, and to have one piece, which is a Gongsun Adorno comparison that sits with it alongside the various other ones in part two, and the other one on methodology, we will find, I think, probably. Well, I need to think about the introduction, or whether perceivably it's part of part three for discussion. Don't have to answer that now. But that's another possible way with this, that it ends up with two separate pieces. And I am not the one to say which is the right way forward on that right now, certainly. And I think if you are willing and able to devote the time to getting this right with the others commenting on drafts in the summer, I think that would be terrific, because I think the prize, let me say what I think the prize is in this, which is to be able to...
Will there be other conferences later on after this one in March next year?
I certainly expect so, yes. But for collective agreement at the end of the next one, from my point of view, it's one step at a time, and collective agreement on that. But I'd like to think this is an ongoing process. We do have to deliver a book manuscript or a book text, and that's effectively the end of the year. So in the specifics of this particular project, the task of a book, that's the sort of time frame, which is why I say the summer is fine. And I
so
think
you are going to submit it in
end of the year, early next year.
By the end of the year, you're going to submit the book. Okay.
But I think that the prize in this is to get something which speaks well, not only to academic professionals steeped in Chinese philosophy and in Western philosophy, but also to, frankly, people like myself, if you've clearly got an interest in the topic, are not, other than having done PPE at Oxford 100 years ago, do not have formal philosophical training, but are avid readers. And they are part of that Bloomsbury readership. And I think there's a really interesting prize at getting to people like that, as well as to those around this screen. And I think it's doable. I think what I draw from this conversation, as well as more generally, is this is doable if we're careful about how we describe things.
Yeah. I'm certainly more than willing to do this because it's really a challenge for me. It is the first time that I'm doing something that I'm writing something for people who are not experts in Chinese philosophy, and it is very much intriguing for me, and I would like to do it well. I'm very happy that you all agreed that you can continue commenting.
You've got a little
on
reader
my-
panel formed around the screen.
Okay. Okay. And I also hope that this will go on afterwards, because I have really learned a lot in this.
I've got to
in
get
this
you over to this
project.
country now.
Sorry.
I said we've got to get you over to this country somehow. Is there any look? I'm conscious it's nearly 5 to 5:02.
Yeah.
We said it was for an hour. Is there anything that
Yeah.
anybody feels we've not said as part of this conversation?
I think Paulus was. Paulus, did you want to? No. I
Super.
have
No.
to pity.
Thanks. I said all I wanted to say in this context. Thanks a lot. No.
Siufu?
Nothing particular, but Jana mentioned the 7 steps instead of the 5 steps in your original draft. So I just wonder what are the 2 extra steps now?
No, so I don't know by heart now, but I think that one was deleted and replaced by another one, and there was an additional one. The most important additional one is this with the mutual complementarity that was not there before. And
Okay.
the other, I might have separated 2 issues into 2 steps that were in 1 step united before.
Nick, do you have any concluding thoughts?
No, joining and losing and joining and losing, joining and losing. I think I've got the thread because I read the written exchange quite carefully, and I think it's been useful, and I'm glad that we had the conversation.
For me, it was really very, very useful. I would like to thank you all again, particularly Alex. And
Well, let me just
I really hope that we'll keep in touch in this project, although I'm not joining the Zoom anymore, but we'll keep in touch with the revised version. And I'm looking forward to see Siufu in Hong Kong.
Sure.
And we can talk about this sublation a lot.
Okay,
At
of
dinner
course.
or something.
Alex, do you have any final thoughts or comments?
Not really, no. I think it's been quite a thorough. It's been kind of thorough going over issues that are more generally important to really all the papers in certain ways.
Yes, they are. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, if it turns out that the right thing to do is to split this into 2 pieces for different parts of the book structure, that may turn out the right answer.
Sure.
Yeah. And
I will listen to this recording again. I think very carefully. Okay.
And otherwise, it would be helpful to know when you and I, Jana, for example, are closest on the globe at some point in the next 6 months, because then it might be possible to just meet up. But if you are ever in England, let us know.
Humanism conference together with Stephen.
Right.
Yeah, you could come to Ljubljana on whenever it is, late May.
Okay.
May.
I'm in Frankfurt in July, in case anybody is close.
I'm in Frankfurt in June.
I'm in Berlin next month.
Okay.
For a day, yeah.
Right.
But I'll be in California, and then in Taiwan until
Jana, you
October.
should treat this as your reading and support group for getting this piece done.
Yes.
I think there's a real prize in this. I think
yes.
it's going to be a really valuable part of the book structure as it comes together in the course of this coming 9 months-ish.
Please, all of you, come to Ljubljana by the end of May. It is a charming city, really.
It is.
Small,
I have been there before.
Okay, so thank you very much again, and we'll keep in touch, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.